Hello, this is Domenico with Easynomics, and today we're going to make some connections between microeconomic models and macroeconomic models, specifically looking at firms and their demand for new technology as a means to reduce costs of production in the long run. Now we're living this era of rising technology across various fields and industries. We're seeing the impacts of rising advances in autonomous technology and how that will bring about an increased number of autonomous cars, self-driving cars. We can talk about in another video about the impact of that on structural unemployment. Autonomous technology also being incorporated into robotic technology. Here we can see with robotic technology, it has many applications in production, which can increase productive efficiency, increase the amount of outputs per unit of time within a producing firm through the applications of robotics in manufacturing. Also with the impacts of autonomous transport. Again, that example of self-driving cars, self-driving trucks, moving resources, goods and services from point A to point B faster, as these technologies would not need to take a break. In addition, domestic robots rising as a consumer product could also be used by firms to maybe maintain their office space or maintain other aspects of the space that firms are operating within. In addition, construction robots can increase the ability to which we can produce new commercial spaces, residential spaces, and so forth faster and more efficiently. Automations in mining using robot technology to go into drilling and might be more unsafe areas for human beings, and so forth. Medical robotic technology, agricultural robotic technology, etc., etc., etc. And let's not forget the impacts on military spending and the applications of military robots, which is a scary thought. And then we also see the advancements in artificial intelligence and its impacts on large language models. Now, with all of this technology, firms are beginning to increase their spending in finding ways to acquire and utilize these new advancements in technology to reduce their costs of production and perhaps also to reduce their dependence on labor and the cost of production being wages. For most firms, on average, the biggest cost of production is labor. So this will be, probably a larger and larger area of concern within the field of economics of what's the impact of this on employed labor. Is it going to generate more structural unemployment? Is it going to create more jobs? Is the rate of job destruction going to be greater than the rate of job creation? But that's all for another discussion. Here we have, for example, an article here about Microsoft providing AI tech to a variety of different firms, and it's highlighting here that it is not able to keep up with the level of demand by firms for the applications and uses of AI technology. So Microsoft says it's seeing more demand for AI than it can keep up with. So this is going to be the subject of this video. So let's try to understand some of the links between microeconomics and macroeconomics in the context of capital. And up here we have a definition for capital, which I'll highlight here right at the top. So capital. All right. One of the four factors of production, it could be physical capital or perhaps a financial capital resource used by firms to produce goods and services. Financial capital or money may be invested by the firm in acquiring physical capital, such as building factories, expanding the size of maybe their production line, businesses, equipment, tools, robotic technology, and so forth. And it can also include intangible capital assets, such as intellectual property and other technological innovations, which could include large language models and so forth. So first on the left side here, we're going to look at demand by firms, as we saw in that article by Microsoft, for these new technologies. So graph A is a micro resource market, which we can see here. The resource market is an input market. So we're looking at inputs, factors of production, land, labor, and capital. But here we're looking at capital, micro resource market for autonomous technology, robotic technology, AI technology, or large language models, and so forth. And we're going to look at the impact of that in the short run, and then we're going to compare that at the macro level to Graph C. Graph C is the macroeconomy, where we see investment spending as a component of aggregate demand by firms on technology, and that tech is a form of physical capital, and also the impact in the short run. So to highlight over here, it says we've learned in macroeconomics that a determinant of AD is investment spending, and investment spending can be impacted by changes in interest rates, changes in corporate debt, but also changes in technology. Technology opens up an opportunity for firms to increase their spending to acquire that technology in the short run, with the goal being that it will reduce their costs of production in the long run. So let's look at it from a micro level and then put it into a macro context. So in Graph A, we have, again, that micro resource market for autonomous technology, robotics, AI, large language models. We're going to have our downward sloping demand curve. We're going to label that D1 equal to our marginal benefit. And we're also going to see at the macro level our downward sloping aggregate demand curve labeled AD1. And aggregate demand is the sum of consumption, investment spending, government spending, and exports minus imports. Going back to Graph A, we'll apply our supply curve at the micro level, the supply of perhaps an individual firm, supply equal to the marginal costs of production. And in Graph C, we'll apply the aggregate supply curve, the sum of all inputs and outputs provided into the national economy, or a macroeconomy, SRAS. Okay. All right. So in macro, for the IB, they want us to know that one of the determinants of AD, again, is that investment spending in acquiring new technology. So here in Graph C, let's first highlight the equilibrium. We're going to have a equilibrium price level, PL1, and equilibrium level of GDP. We'll call that Y1. And at the micro level, here we have individual firm producing, this is a resource market. So the value of those resources at P1 and the quantity of those resources demanded by firms at Q1. Okay. Now, again, this is a resource market. This is an input market. All right. So we're looking at this in Graph A. So I'm just going to make a note here that the demand in this resource market is coming from firms, and the supply is perhaps coming from other firms supplying that technology, and other firms demanding that technology. So in macro, the determinant of AD, investment spending, a change in tech. These new technologies cause firms to demand them in the macro level. So we see AD shifting out, 81 to 82. And as a result of that increased aggregate demand driven by investment spending, we see an increase in the price level, generating demand pull inflation into the economy, and an increase in output, economic growth being achieved, real GDP increasing from Y1 to Y2, and we see an increase in the quantity of aggregate supply along that aggregate supply curve from let's say point A to point B. And because that increased aggregate demand, firms that are providing autonomous technology, robotic technology, they're increasing their output, they're employing more resources, more land, labor, and capital to generate more of those inputs demanded by other firms as a form of input. So we get demand pull inflation, an increase in real GDP, more economic growth, and more employment in the industries generating this technology as a form of physical capital. So in microeconomics, there should be a link there. So if there's an increase in investment spending and acquiring physical capital, by firms, we would expect at the micro level that there would also be an increase in demand for those technologies. So in graph A, here we have the micro model of individual firms increasing their demand for autonomous technology, robotic technology, AI technology, language learning models, and so forth. And that would also increase the price of those technologies at the micro level from P1 to P2, leading to an increase in the output from Q1 to Q2, generating increase in the quantity supplied along the supply curve from point A to point B. All right, so here we have that increase in demand, as we saw again in that article about Microsoft. Microsoft, as a firm, not able to keep up with demand by other firms for their AI technology. Okay, so here's a link between microeconomics and macroeconomics. In this graph A, it's an input market. We're looking at that resource market and the provision of these new technologies by other firms. And in graph B, at the macro level, we're seeing the sum of all these firms demanding these technologies having an impact on the macroeconomy through investment spending on acquiring physical capital, if it's a robot that occupies space that's tangible, or maybe intangible technologies such as language learning models and so forth. Okay, so there's a link, aggregate demand, linking to our micro model. But let's also take into account the impact on the supply curve. So in the short run, firms make these investments in acquiring these resources, but the goal here is to reduce the cost of production, to reduce price for their products in the product market. And if we can reduce price in the product market, we can become the cheaper substitute and hopefully grab market share. So we've learned in microeconomics that a non-price determinant of supply is any change in cost of production, and technology has the power to reduce our costs of production, and any change in technology. So acquiring new technologies reduces costs, makes the firm more productively efficient, which will also reduce the cost of production. So let's illustrate in the long run the impact of the acquisition of technology for individual firms. So here we'll have our supply curve, and this is going to be the supply of the output. Oops, I'll call this S1. Yeah, let's just call it S1. And this is the product market, so we're now in the output market. So this is supplied by firms. And then over here we have our demand for the firm's outputs by the household. All right, just squeezing it in there, household. We have an equilibrium price, an equilibrium quantity. P1, Q1, point A. All right. On the macro side, we'll draw our short-run aggregate supply curve. And then we'll also draw our aggregate demand curve. And then we have the equilibrium price level and the equilibrium level of economic output in the macroeconomy, price level at PL1, and real GDP at Y1. Also calling this point A. So at the micro level, firms are demanding these new technologies, and as they acquire these new technologies, that will have the impact in graph B on the output side of reducing their costs of production. That being a non-price determinant of supply, changes in cost of production through the acquisition of new technologies, reducing their costs of production. So the supply curve shifts downward from S1 to S2. And as a result of that, we could perhaps have the price fall from P1 to P2, leading to increased output from Q1 to Q2. Moving from point A to B, and as the price falls for the output, perhaps these goods and services become cheaper substitutes relative to their competition through those investments, and we get an increase in the quantity of demand from point A to D. We also see that increases the consumer surplus for these outputs. So consumer surplus increases to become this whole area here. Originally, the consumer surplus was, let's say, this area here. And then it increases to this additional area here due to the reduced price. Increased consumer surplus leads to households being able to save that money, invest that money, or spend it into other sectors of the economy. I could label that if I wanted to for my evaluation, highlighting that consumer surplus was originally area A, and then it becomes areas A plus B plus C plus D. Okay, more output, Q1 to Q2, reduced price, increased consumer surplus. So those can be some evaluative points. On the macro side, graph D, macroeconomy, new technology reduces the short-run aggregate supply curve. We've learned that in the IB that the determinants of the short-run aggregate supply curve means a change in the costs of production. And a change of the costs of production can be a result of the acquisition of new technologies. We've learned as well that shifts in the LRAS curve can be due to improvements in technology. So the long-run aggregate supply curve is shifting out. Thus, we can assume that any factor shifting LRAS in the long run would also cause the short-run aggregate supply curve to shift out. So here we have graph D, short-run aggregate supply, shifting outward, SRAS1 to SRAS2. This is leading to reduced cost push inflation, price levels falling from PL1 to PL2, and real GDP is increasing from Y1 to Y2. From point A to point B, the lower price level leads to an increase in the quantity of aggregate demand. We also see an increase in overall consumer surplus in the macroeconomy. Those savings can lead to additional spending in other sectors of the economy. It could be invested, it could be saved, and so forth. Okay, so that was the goal of this video, to just highlight some links between microeconomics and macroeconomics, and how they're connected in this regards to the acquisition of technologies, physical capital by firms to increase their productive efficiency, reduce their cost of production, and so on. If you have any questions, feel free to comment those questions below, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.